As Far as Anyone Knows is a mostly Latino history podcast where each week your hosts, Minerva Angeles
and Fredo B,
take turns sharing some Latino history,
bad jokes,
and ancestral love.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of As Far as Anyone Knows. I'm your host, Fredo B.
And I'm your co-host, Minerva Angeles.
So today we're going to wrap up our Women's History Month with a group of badass, rebellious women from Mexico. But before we get into that, Minerva, what is on your mind?
What I've been thinking about a lot is the vaccine and how everything's looking up a little bit. More and more people are able to get appointments.
Yeah.
I got my first shot. I expect you to get your first shot in the next 2 weeks.
Next week. Not this week, next week.
Yeah. It's all looking up, and, there's been a lot of talk about people being nervous about it, but at this point it feels like it's not a matter of if most people are getting it, it's a matter of when. Mm-hmm. Which makes me feel like, it's going to be a good summer, And when I mean good in the context of COVID, right? Like, most people will be getting the vaccine. That means the numbers will be low. That means we'll be able to go out and do stuff. I'm not talking about going crazy, like Miami crazy, because no disrespect to Miami. No disrespect, but I don't know if it's that's y'all or whoever be going down there.
Spring break.
Or if it's a combination.
Yeah.
But that's wild.
But apparently I was told that, like, locals don't go to Miami Beach. They go to Wynwood. So, like, that's not local.
Right. So it's probably people that are, like, tourists or whatever. And it's unfortunate for, there are some things that are very Miami that you 100% need to be accountable for.
Yeah.
But then that kind of stuff, I feel bad because it gets wrapped up into the Miami hype. And I'm like, well, that's mostly tourists that are, like, just drunk and just doing crazy stuff. So, I think that's just wild because, like, those people are probably not vaccinated. So I'm just like, y'all need to relax. But I don't mean that crazy. Like, I don't think anyone should be, like, busting it open on a moving vehicle. That's just not safe. You can bust it open, but it needs to be under safe circumstances.
Wear an N95.
And wear an N95. You know what I'm saying? Like... Like, all right,
it's about safety, guys.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you're on the hood of a moving vehicle. That's the number one concern at this time. Additionally, unless you're vaccinated and you seem to be in and out of, like, large groups of people, you should be wearing an N95.
Yeah. The crazy thing to me is that, thinking about last summer, for us, yes, we were definitely still, like, heavily locked down. We were not going anywhere. We were barely seeing family. But I think depending on what part of the country you're in, I don't know if too many people were quarantined in the summer. I'll be honest. Like, last summer, I think it was a pretty normal summer, except for the fact that, the mass unemployment, people dying, and all these other things. People were still out there living their best life.
Okay, but, like, not in New York.
I can't speak for all of New York, but
I just feel like
people were out in the park.
We were really
people
going through it in New York. You may have forgotten what last summer was like. That was.
I remember the spring. I remember spring this time. Yeah, it was rough.
It was really rough. We were losing, like, almost 800 people a day.
Yeah.
And then the George Floyd situation popped off, and the protests and everything.
But once July came around, I knew Americans. 4th of July. Do you remember 4th of July?
No, it was the fireworks.
And the weeks leading up to the fireworks.
No, I almost forgot about them fireworks. That was when everybody was getting the extra $600, and they were spending literally $600 a week on fireworks.
Yeah.
Like, the entire community.
Okay, let's not say that. I don't know if everybody was spending $600.
It felt like that. That's
what it felt like. Yeah, like never-ending fireworks. And I'm still down with my conspiracy theory that that was a whole government thing.
It's not a government thing. It's assholes. No. It was assholes.
The government was providing these.
Okay. You sound. Oh my God! I have to edit that out. You sound crazy.
It doesn't matter. Whatever. I'm not gonna get too into it, but it was a conspiracy, guys.
It's not a conspiracy.
All
They
right,
were
whatever.
just dumb people.
Either way, so like again, we're digressing from the point of. I think for the most part, people were still like hanging out. I remember people still taking their vacations. People, I think, most people were cautious, but there was a very sizable group of people who were living their life. They're very much talking about that. COVID's not going to stop them. I think that number is going to increase this summer, and it's going to be, it's going to be a hot boy, hot girl summer out here. That's what it's going to be.
Hot person.
Hot, yeah.
It's gonna be a hot person summer.
Yeah, for those non-binary.
Yeah, let's give a shout out to my non-binary fam.
So it's just gonna be a hot summer, and people are gonna be taking advantage of it. I think things are gonna pop off in ways that we're not anticipating. Hopefully nothing bad comes out of it. That's my sincere hope, and everybody has a great time, because I'm going to the streets. The streets are calling my name.
It's lit. Oh my god. See, obviously, again, my definition of yay, everything's opening up and that feels better is so different from other people. Because for me, I'm like, oh, I can finally do some of the things that everyone else was doing while I was home.
Yeah.
I haven't felt comfortable going out to eat or nothing like that. Some of these restaurants, they're outdoor and it's fine, but
even then I was not.
I'm just it's too close. If somebody right behind me, that table ain't 6 feet away from me. How is this okay? Yeah. So I wasn't cool with that. You know what I'm saying? And that's why I hadn't really been doing anything. So now,
also for context, we live in New York City. Outdoor dining is on a street curb. Really?
Nasty, bro. Nasty. And then the way they was building these.
So it'd be random people walking through the dining area, right? Because you're out on the street. So if you're dining outside on the sidewalk, essentially. And anybody could walk past you.
Exactly. And the way that they were all built, it was flimsy. There were some of these restaurants had built basically canopies outside just to be able to get, the permit, because you had to fit certain sort of guidelines to section off a little side of the curb. And then you would get a permit to have a section of the curb outside of your restaurant so you can host outdoor dining. Which is great. Let's keep the restaurants open. I know the restaurants have been struggling. More power to them. But some of these structures were flimsy as hell. And there were times, especially during hurricane season, we don't necessarily get crazy hurricanes, but we approach tropical storms and high winds and stuff like that. There was a week at the end of the summer last year that I was like, yeah, there's certain blocks I'm not going to try to walk down because there's definitely flying debris from restaurants, flimsy outdoor sections that are flying around for sure. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and again, it's they didn't have enough space to really space it out. In some places where there is space for outdoor dining, I'm sure there's restaurants in existence elsewhere where it's just normally set up that each table is 6 feet away from each other. Here, the tables are back to back to back all the time, which never bothered me until now. So I'll be, I'm just excited to be able to get out there, and I feel more comfortable outdoor dining after I get my second shot.
We're slowly going out there, We took our kids to the playground for the first time in a long time. Well, since this whole popped off last year, so over a year ago. More than a year because it was winter time, so they weren't going to the park anyway. Right. So for them, it's been over a year since they've been to the park. But can't say that I wasn't nervous as all hell because, of course, it was the first nice day here in New York City. So, of course, all the parents were out there with their kids, right? Mm-hmm. And you're, telling your kid, keep your mask on, stay away, don't touch anything. If you touch something, here's some hand sanitizer. Because at this point, too, it's not just Rona. It's also, our kids have not gotten, a cold, so much as a cold this whole time. So just really trying to make sure that we're we're being safe, and I hope everybody else is being as safe as you can be. I know everybody has different opinions about this, this is not. I guess it's not. It's this, and it's intersectional in that way, right? Like where everybody has different feelings about. Some people don't feel safe getting the vaccine. Some people.
Yeah, it's totally a personal choice. Yeah.
Yeah, some people are very much like, I don't want to wear masks and whatever. At the end of the day, you're gonna do what you want to do, right?
Yeah. No, and to be clear, when I said personal choice, I mean it's a personal choice to get the vaccine because that is something you're putting inside of your body, and like nobody should tell you what to put inside of your body. 100%, I agree. But the mask is should not, and at least right now, be a personal choice because if you're not wearing a mask, you could potentially hurt someone else. So like that's a public health issue. That's different from, the government forcing you to get a vaccine. That's like obviously not okay. But if you all we're asking you to do is wear a mask while you're around other people, like you could do that, homie.
Somebody, depending on the state, it's not mandated anymore, like Texas. And some people feel like it is infringing upon their civil liberties, right? Because like technically, for me, I think the vaccine should be a government mandate in the same way that, the measles, mumps, and rubella is a mandated.
But that's technical. So that's, I think you are required to get the MMR shot if you are participating in like a government's, entity. So if you're in school, that's when you have to do it. If you're working for a school or a program that's licensed by the Department of Education or the Department of Health or whatever, that's when you have to get that shot. So technically, if you're homeschooling your kids,
unless you're homeschooling your kid,
right,
you're
then
not.
you don't have to whatever. But even private schools, I believe, are like accredited or licensed by the Department of Education or something. So they require it as per that mandate. So, yeah, you would have to find some place that has the exemption, and even in some cases, I think didn't they recently eliminate the religious exemption?
Yeah, I believe so. And it depends. It varies from state to state, so it's not. But you know what I just learned not that long ago? It's crazy because, like, chicken pox. It's no longer a thing.
What do you mean?
At least here in the United States.
It's eradicated?
Kids don't really get chicken pox.
Well, yeah, they all get the vaccine.
Yeah.
But you understand.
But like that's what I'm saying. Like I come from a time where I'm like, I got chicken pox.
Yeah, but it's interesting because I have a vaccination for varicella, but I had the chicken pox. So dime a ver.
So depends. The vaccine for chicken pox, the varicella vaccine, didn't exist until 1995.
So they gave it to me after the fact.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's that supposed to do for me? If I already had it?
It could prevent you from getting it again. Like in some cases, as an adult, you could get it again.
I know that there's shingles.
Shingles is even worse.
Yeah, does that prevent shingles? Because like that would
no.
Be nice.
Well, there's a shingles vaccine.
Okay, honey, where do we sign up for that?
Apparently, you only qualify if you're like 50 and older, which I'm like,
okay.
That's bullshit. Because like younger people definitely get shingles, but okay.
Yeah, and I'm totally signing up for that as soon as I turn 50 because my aunt has shingles and that was not good. It was so hard on her, and she's much older, so that was a mess. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely not gonna be able to handle
fucking around with shingles, but anyway, yeah. So again, I know there's a lot of misgivings or mistrust on the government's behalf, and rightly so. But I think, for me, if privileged white people are out here like sneaking into our neighborhoods to get the vaccine, I'm like, you know what? Maybe there's something to this. If they want it, I want it.
Yeah, that's the gauge. For me, that's the gauge. Is this being gentrified? In that case, is okay, we could have it. Because I understand we all have a history of as colonized people that, they've used us as lab rats historically, and we know that we can't really trust these entities. And so I really understand that on a very profound level. And that's why I said it's a personal choice, because the trauma is still there for a lot of people. So, if you still decide, even after hearing all of that, that you still don't want to get the vaccine, I really can understand why. There were people, that were sterilized. I mean, there's just, the Tuskegee situation. We should do several episodes on all those. There's situations. Look those up. The sterilization of women in Puerto Rico and the Tuskegee. Was it the fire
experiments?
Yeah. So they were, that's really real. So, and we want to be clear that in this case we have, instances where white people are taking planes to British Columbia and taking vaccines that were meant for Native people. We have white people taking scheduled appointments at an armory up in Washington Heights that's meant for people of color. And because that's not how the appointments work, they went ahead and took all their appointments, and we're seeing.
And weren't they getting appointments in like Elmhurst or Corona? There was
yes,
yeah,
yes,
and that,
in all
and
of
for
our
those of you who don't know, and here in New York City, Elmhurst is a neighborhood in Queens that was the hardest hit. There were like literally so many bodies that the hospital couldn't. They had to get like basically a freezer truck to hold them. The morgue couldn't hold all the bodies, so they had to get a freezer truck that you saw outside. So one of the hardest hit communities, people were sneaking in to get the the vaccine.
People that were not, high priority in a neighborhood where we lost so many people. I was born in that hospital. I know that neighborhood very well, and that neighborhood is almost entirely essential workers. So it's very unfortunate to see that we lost so many people because they were the people, delivering food and, cleaning places and keeping places sanitized during this nightmare. And those were the people that we were losing the most. And to see that people are unable to get appointments and that it was going to others, it's a shame. It's a shame. And we need to do better. We need to do a lot better. Which again, just, if that helps anybody feel better about the vaccine, yay. And if you don't, then, again, very understandable that if you don't. But yeah, on that note, why don't you tell us about these badass queens? You got me interested.
All right. So today we're going to talk about the women who made the Mexican Revolution possible, las soldaderas. So, Minerva, as you know, for much of history, women's lives throughout Latin America and most of the world were limited not only by law but through gender roles. A woman remained under the control of a man her entire life. In her childhood, it was her father. In her adulthood, it was her husband, brother, or uncle. Even if she joined a convent, her life was regulated by the Catholic Church that was run by men. So participation in the Mexican Revolution would open an avenue of liberation from patriarchal society. So this is one reason women took up arms. But as you'll hear, the reasons for the women joining the revolution were very personal and varied wildly. But before I get into that, I think I need to contextualize a little bit about the Mexican Revolution. So here is the Mexican Revolution completely oversimplified. Okay, so you got this guy, Porfirio Diaz, who gained some notoriety in 1862 after he helped the heavily outnumbered Mexican army defeat the invading French army at the Battle of Puebla, an event that is commemorated and celebrated to this day every Cinco de Mayo. Diaz believed he should be president of Mexico, being a war hero and all, So he ran for president, but lost. So he was like, fuck it, I'll just take the power. So in 1876, he staged a coup overthrowing the Mexican government and becoming president. As president, Porfirio basically sold out the Mexico to any foreign business that was willing to pay big bucks. So giving land and giving deregulating shit all over the left and right, and keeping the money for himself and few wealthy elites, while the poor people who worked the land remained dirt poor. But after an economic downturn in 1907, even the middle and upper class citizens were like, this is bullshit. So in 1910, Francisco Madero decided to challenge Diaz in that year's presidential race. Diaz saw that he was gaining momentum and popularity amongst the masses. Actually, he was really intersectional. So like a lot of people were like, yeah, this is wrong. This fucked up situation. So like everybody from like the indigenous people, the mestizo, the dirt poor, the middle class, and even some upper class people were really starting to change their minds about what the government was doing. So Porfirio Diaz saw that he was gaining momentum, and he had him jailed. Madero eventually fled to Texas, where he issued a call for all Mexicans to rise up against their government. This was the official start of the Mexican Revolution. What followed would be a decade of infighting between different factions that wanted to seize power for themselves. One after another, would-be presidents either found themselves exiled, such as the case of Porfirio Diaz, or assassinated, which is basically everybody who was involved in the Mexican Revolution tried to take power. So the war officially ended in 1920, but some uprisings continued through the 1930s. One of the outcomes of the Mexican Revolution was government control by one party, the PRI. PRI is Partido Revolucionario Institucional, or Institutional Revolutionary Party. That party ruled Mexico for almost 80 years. So from 1929 through 2000, and then they got back into power again in like 2013, but then they lost again. So currently they're not holding power. But yeah, so that's the Mexican Revolution oversimplified. It's very complicated. There are a whole bunch of figures involved in this. Some of which you may have heard of, like Emiliano Zapata or Pancho Villa. But there are a couple of other people like that are involved that were also trying to grab power. So it's important that you know that you had several different factions in this going on, and women pretty much joined all of them. So you had the Federales, which was the federal government, and then you had the Zapatistas, people who were under Emiliano Zapata's control or command, and then you had all the other couple different. There was a whole bunch of didn't have nice names like Zapatistas. Mm-hmm. Pancho Villa's gang didn't have a nice. The Villas, doesn't have a same ring to it.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, back to the soldaderas. So the word soldadera has its origins in Spanish and the Spanish conquest. So it dates back to that time. The soldaderas were responsible for aiding the army by finding food and caring for injured soldiers. The term has been applied to Spanish women who fought during the conquest. As Spanish became Mexico's language after the conquest, the term soldadera was used to describe all women who fought and aided in any of Mexico's conflicts.
Regardless of race. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So, again, this was a pretty intersectional revolution in the sense that because you literally, from what I read, you had the entire country fighting. So you had northern factions, southern factions, east, west, pretty much everybody involved. So again, indigenous, Afro-Mexicans, you had everybody fighting, and for different reasons. It was not, and I think that's why there were so many different factions, right? Because there was so many different interests involved into this, and that's, and you see that also play out in the reasons why women joined. So during the Mexican Revolution, while some women played traditional roles of aides, nurses, or wives, many of them took up arms. They were not just there to play the traditional role, right? So, because the image of the soldadera, is wearing dresses with long skirts, the straw hats, and bullet chains across their chests while holding rifles. It's an iconic image. So women felt emancipated by becoming soldiers in the Mexican Revolution. As soldaderas, women found they were able to rise above some of the limitations in their lives. So, as outlined in the 2009 scholarly article by Delia Fernandez, who's now an assistant professor of history and core faculty in Chicano Latino Studies at Michigan State University. I have a link to the article. It's a lengthy article, but it's interesting. It gives a whole lot of detail too about everything in terms of the Mexican Revolution, the women who played a role in it. So women showed that they could hold their own amid a bloody civil war. These soldiers fought on all sides, with many elite women joining the Federales, and other joining different revolutionary leaders like Emiliano Zapata, Pancho Villa, and Venustiano Carranza. So, Minerva, it's not going to surprise you that despite the fact that, these women were fighting side by side with a lot of these men, misogyny still played a big role.
You don't say.
Yeah, so, listen, life for anybody in the middle of a bloody civil war is not easy. It was especially not easy for the soldaderas, who faced oppression, threat of violence, rape, and death. So, for example, according to most accounts, Pancho Villa was not a fan of soldaderas. He didn't really see their value during attacks. He liked to do quick maneuvers. And remember, we talked about Pancho Villa in one of our earlier episodes briefly when we talked about Latino images in film. Remember, he liked the limelight, so he was always looking for the best light. He was always looking for the best shot because he was working with American documentaries or filmmakers. So I think that also played a role in it, but I don't think he liked the idea of women,
Yeah, I mean, because all that sounds like BS or whatever. Because he's like, oh, he wants to get in there quick. Like, are women like slow for some reason? I mean, it sounds like BS. Yeah,
I don't know, but so he didn't, so he didn't see the value of them being there during attacks. So there's conflicting stories about Villa's opinions of soldaderas and women in general. One story describes Villa as a man who wanted to protect women and relegated them to the back of the firing line to places of safety. So it was really like, oh, this is for your safety. I need you to stay. Actually, can you stay back in the camp and, do some of the cooking and cleaning? Actually, my pants need sewing.
Yeah.
So it's for your safety.
I'm triggered.
Because I care about you so much.
I'm so triggered.
Yeah. But another story pretty much describes a time where Villa ordered the massacre of 90 women and children prisoners under his command.
Oh, he sounds
lovely.
Awful. He sounds awful. Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense that he would be the type of person who would want to film a scripted reality television show.
Ego, narcissism, right?
Yeah.
So if it doesn't fit in his narrative,
like, yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, I see it.
Yeah. So I mean, other people didn't. So Emiliano Zapata, for example, he saw value in the soldaderas. He regularly allowed them to fight side by side with him. He would pay them, although there's stories of of one soldadera who really became a myth at some point, where she was like, allegedly, again, this is all because at some point stories become convoluted, where she allegedly was like, I refuse to take payment. I'm going to just go and I'm fighting for the good fight. I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. But
okay.
Anyway. So it varies, right? So we don't know exactly how many women the soldaderas were, how many of them were. Part of that has to do because of the way they were counted. Some people, depending on the faction, only counted the ones who actually fought. Picked up a gun and fought. And others counted the women who were also playing the traditional caretaker role, like nurses and wives, who were just kind of there at the camp, which is an important role. I don't want to diminish that. Like,
yeah, that's I mean, who else? Somebody got to cook. I mean, men can do it too, but yes, that's an important role.
Yeah. So it's interesting to note that while some women took to arms willingly because of like whatever they believed in the movement, the revolution, some people were really about taking back their land. Other people were like, you have to overthrow this fucking government, the bullshit. Others didn't have a choice. There were young girls as young as 13, 14 years old who went to fight basically because there was no other choice. It was like, okay, well, daddy's going to go to war. Mommy's going to come with daddy because daddy can't take care of himself. So therefore you have to come with us too. Or sometimes like the brother would go and fight and they would send the younger sister and be like, or the sister, and be like, hey, go and take care of him. So in some of those cases, what would happen is the brother would die. And it was like, at that point, some of these girls were, I imagine for some of them, they would go back home. But for the most part, things were so unorganized and chaotic that it gave women a certain sense of liberation that they weren't going to get back at home. Right? So for a lot of these young girls, they were like, fuck it, I'm staying here. I'm fighting.
Yeah.
So, again, women who fought in the revolution did so for a variety of reasons. Some women fought in support of revolutionary ideals like agrarian reform. And as I mentioned, others fought because the men in their lives were fighting and they wanted to support. One example is Manuela Oaxaca, who was 15 years old when she decided to follow her boyfriend into war. I couldn't find any other information in terms of like what happened to her or her boyfriend, if she regretted that decision. But
what did she do when, like, what was her role? Like, what did women often do? Like so it sounds like there were women obviously that took care of stuff and cooked and whatever, and then there were women who fought.
They were at the battle lines, son.
Right. So how does that, like?
How do you decide what role you're gonna play?
Yeah, like who does what?
So I think it really is. It comes to a personal choice. I think.
Okay.
Or sometimes not, depending again. Like if you have a Pancho Villa, he's not gonna most likely might not let you fight. But it also comes down to a personal choice. Like, hey, I'm going to. You guys go on and fight. I'm gonna stay back here and take care of the camp because you guys are gonna be hungry when you come back.
Yeah.
And then others are like, fuck this shit. I'm gonna go shoot some of these motherfuckers, because they hated the government. So like a lot of these rebellion factions, the women hated the federal government. And one example of a woman who took arms, not because of altruistic reasons or because she was really believed in the movement, but out of pure rage and vengeance, is a woman named Angela Jimenez. Angela Jimenez. So she joined the war after watching her sister kill a soldier who attempted to rape her. So her father was off in the revolution. So it was her and her sister back at home. And the Federales came looking for rebels. They would do this a lot. They would threaten women with violence. So they attempted to rape her sister. So her sister managed to fight him off, took the gun, and shot him dead. Unfortunately, she was so distraught with like the whole event that she then turned the gun on herself and she killed herself.
Oh my god, that's terrible.
So Angela was so full of rage that she decided to avenge her sister's death by joining her father in the revolution, where she would fight disguised as a man and go by the name of Angel. She eventually attained the rank of lieutenant colonel. Jimenez's true identity was known by most of the men around her. She wasn't really fooling anybody.
She was like her drag was trash.
Yeah, her boy drag was not really that great. Okay. Most people knew, but she maintained this level of badassness where she threatened anybody who like tried to even flirt with her. She was like, "No, you're gonna fucking treat me like a man while I'm here."
Oh my god, I love that. Oh my god, I live for that.
Yeah. So like she gained a reputation for being a badass, for being a woman who you did not want to fuck with.
Well, she identified as a woman, right?
She identified as a woman.
Yeah. Okay.
So another woman who joined the fight and presented as male was Amelia Robles. So there's a number of stories like this actually in the Mexican Revolution. So you had the iconic image of the women wearing the dresses with the, still presenting as women. But there was a number of women who decided to go as dressed as men because of the threat of violence, the threat of rape. It was still prevalent, right? Misogyny is misogyny. So a lot of women decided to go in dressed as men to try to prevent that or keep it at bay as much as possible, right? Amelia Robles, she joined the revolution in 1912 as under Emiliano Zapata. So Robles began to dress as a man and demanded to be treated as such. So to appear physically male, Robles deliberately chose shirts with large chest pockets and assumed the mannerisms common among the men at the time. So which meant they were known for their aggression, drinking, womanizing, and skills with guns and horses. So from 1913, Robles fought as El Coronel Robles. But unlike Jimenez, who after the revolution went back to living her life as a woman, Robles actually continued to live as a man after the war.
So are they trans?
So it's believed that Robles was actually one of the first transgender figures in Latin American history.
Oh my god, that's so awesome!
So without the bonds he built without fellow soldiers during the war, he likely wouldn't have been able to maintain his male identity after leaving battle. He actually was recognized by the veterans group eventually, and he was able to get not reparations, but like payment. So he was recognized as a soldier in the army.
Wow, that's great.
So these are just two examples.
Did he change his name?
He continued to live as Emilio. So he was born Amelia, switched to Emilio.
Okay.
So there's a whole bunch of examples of that. Like there was another one, Petra Herrera, who fought under Pedro, but she was another one who. So this one's just interesting. So Petra, she again joined the war, but this one she actually believed in the cause. She was like, "I'm here to topple the government," because she was more of an indigenous-looking woman, or mestiza. So she went she joined the revolution under Pedro, and she, by all accounts, again, very skilled fighter, great with guns, great on a horse. She was a skilled, natural-born leader. She had people following her, and people didn't know. Unlike Angela or Angel, people really weren't hip to the fact that Pedro was Petra. It wasn't until she got a promotion to in the rank of lieutenant colonel, that somehow they found out. And unlike in Mulan, they didn't kick her out of the army. they actually were like, "Oh, okay, cool. Why the fuck were you hiding as a fucking Pedro? Just be yourself." And they gave her own battalion to lead, and it was an all-female battalion
Oh my god. Oh my god, I love this.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Uh, so after the war, the soldaderas returned back to their regular lives. Unfortunately, you know, things didn't change for women in Mexico. You know, it was pretty much back to standard business. Because again, I think it's important to note that the soldaderas weren't intentionally a feminist movement. They weren't going in fighting saying, "No, we're
Equality for women,
yeah,
everything.
we're."
Yeah.
It was more like because the reasons varied so much and they were so personal. Again, like when in the case of Angela, who was fighting to avenge her sister's death, there were many cases of women who didn't have a choice, who were kidnapped by the federales and made to fight for them, or sometimes they would um, escape their imprisonment and then go fight for a different rebellious faction. Um, and the so it wasn't, again, it wasn't an intentional feminist movement. It was just something that, like, hey, this is literally gripping the country for 10 years. There's no, I don't think there was a part of Mexico that was untouched by this civil war. So their legacy, of course, is immeasurable, as we've seen throughout many revolutions throughout the 20th century across the globe, but particularly in Latin America. You know, women have been fighting alongside men. In Cuba, you have, you know, Castro definitely had women lieutenant. They were in the front lines. They were leading charges. There were women, female battalions. And as was the case for the Sandinista revolution in the 1970s in Nicaragua, women were in the front lines. Um, and I think it became more common definitely afterwards. Um, but for the soldaderas, you know, it took time for them to really get the props that they deserve, right? They weren't given their flowers right away. It was a matter of fact, everything was done to like kind of diminish their
Contributions.
contribution. So from the outset, like, you know, there were um, songs written about them, but like really romanticizing them, but not in like how you would romanticize a hero. It'd be really like so another term you might hear for soldaderas is las adelitas. It come from a song called La Adelita, which the guy's really talking about like their beauty and, you know, how they fawn over men and blah blah blah. So it's not the picture of a soldier woman. It's really if you know, and I'll show you a picture of an Adelita. It's kind of a caricature of the soldadera, where it's this woman wearing a low cut top and you know, skin tight dress, but still with the you know, the bullet chain, but still so an over sexualized version of what a soldadera really was.
Mm.
Um, and that continued throughout the first half of the 20th century in Mexican media, with a lot of movies they were portrayed as either you know, subservient to men, as prostitutes, um, and pretty much that's it. It was like, you know, they really only wanted to be with their men type situation.
Mm.
It wasn't a matter of like, we're taking up arms. But that, again, that changed in the later half of the 20th century, where they finally got their props, and people and women like Angela Jimenez actually continued the fight for their recognition. Um, so she actually moved to California after the war. She moved to California, and she continued to pretty much keep the legacy of the Soldaderas alive, and led some smaller local women's movements. But she wanted to make sure that the Soldaderas, were recognized for their contributions to
Mm.
the war. Um, but yeah, so now we're here, and I think we're finally in a moment in history again, similar to like Dolores Huerta, right, where we're starting to kind of look back at our known history, where you had these men that are known like Pancho Villa, Emiliano Zapata, and their stories are widely known. But now I think we're starting to revisit history and kind of really take a look at, well, who else was there contributing, right? Mm-hmm. In this, and in not many cases, it was women of color, or other people on the margins of society. Right. So I think it's important that we continue to talk and really look and discover the contributions of women like the soldaderas.
Yeah. That's great. I did not know about them. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the story of the soldaderas of the Mexican Revolution.
Thanks for listening. That's all we have for this week, folks. Ha-hum. See you soon. Follow us on social media. You can follow our podcast at AFACPod, that's at AFAAK Pod, or follow our hosts, Minerva at It's Minerva Angel, and at Fredo_B on Twitter.